When I walked through the front door of our Millfield Heights mansion at 3:47 p.m. on what should have been an ordinary Tuesday, expecting to surprise my husband Devin with an early return from my business trip to Seattle, I never imagined I'd catch him in our master bedroom with my supposed best friend, Natasha, planning something that would expose just how little they both knew about who they were really dealing with. But what happened after they realized I'd been standing there recording everything would shatter their world in ways they never saw coming. Before we dive back in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe because tomorrow's story is something truly special I can't wait to share. My name is Cassandra Thorne, and if you've ever been betrayed by the two people you trusted most, if you've ever discovered that your entire life was built on lies, or if you've ever been underestimated by people who thought they knew your limits, stay with me. Because what my cheating husband and backstabbing best friend learned about my real identity, my actual resources, and my capacity for strategic revenge will leave you speechless. The flight from Seattle to Millfield had been turbulent, both literally and figuratively. I'd wrapped up the Pemberton Industries merger 3 days ahead of schedule, which should have been cause for celebration. Instead, I found myself staring out the airplane window, thinking about how distant Devin had become over the past 6 months. The late-night phone calls he claimed were work-related, the weekend business trips to locations that never quite added up, the way he'd stopped looking me in the eye when he said he loved me. For the past year, I'd been traveling extensively for what Devin believed was my job as a regional marketing coordinator for a mid-tier consulting firm called Hartwell & Associates. It was a perfectly believable cover story, complete with business cards, a modest salary that got deposited into our joint checking account, and enough mundane details about fictional clients and tedious meetings to bore him into never asking too many questions. What Devin didn't know, what no one in Millfield knew, was that Cassandra Thorne, the marketing coordinator, was an elaborate fiction. The real Cassandra Thorne was the founder and CEO of Apex Strategic Holdings, a private equity firm that had quietly acquired controlling interests in 17 companies across 4 industries over the past 5 years. The business trips were board meetings, merger negotiations, and due diligence visits to properties worth more than most people would earn in 10 lifetimes. I'd started Apex with money I'd inherited from my grandmother, a brilliant investor who taught me that the smartest predators never let their prey know they're being hunted. Never show your hand until it's time to play your cards, and when you do play them, make sure it's a royal flush, she used to say. Devin and I had met 7 years ago at a charity gala in downtown Millfield. He was charming, handsome, and worked as a commercial real estate developer for a firm called Sterling Properties. He wasn't wealthy, but he was ambitious, and I was attracted to his drive and confidence. More importantly, he'd fallen in love with Cassandra, the marketing coordinator, not Cassandra, the secret multimillionaire, which I'd thought meant his feelings were genuine. For the past 4 years of our marriage, I'd convinced myself that hiding my wealth was romantic, even noble. Devin loved me for who I was, not what I had. He worked hard to provide for us, taking pride in paying the mortgage on our modest 3-bedroom home in Millfield's middle-class Oakwood subdivision. He'd insisted on covering most of our expenses, wanting to be the provider in our relationship. When I'd suggested we upgrade to a larger house in prestigious Millfield Heights, I'd done it carefully, claiming I'd received a promotion and substantial raise that would allow us to afford the move. Devin had been thrilled, proud of my success, eager to show off our new address to his colleagues and friends. The $2.3 million mansion was actually purchased with my personal funds, but Devin believed we were stretching our budget to achieve the American dream together. The irony was almost poetic. While Devin worked 60-hour weeks to afford what he thought was our lifestyle, I was quietly building an empire that could have bought his entire company without affecting my quarterly earnings. While he stressed about mortgage payments and car loans, I owned properties across 3 states and had a portfolio that generated more passive income in a month than his annual salary. But somewhere along the way, keeping the secret had become less about protecting our relationship and more about protecting myself from the complications that money brings. I'd watched wealthy friends deal with partners who changed after learning about their assets, who suddenly became demanding, entitled, or manipulative. I'd seen marriages destroyed by prenups, by family members who emerged from nowhere with their hands out, by the constant question of whether someone loved you or your bank account. Devin had never shown signs of being money motivated, but he also lived in a world where he believed our joint income barely covered our expenses. I had never tested how he might react to learning his wife was worth more than he'd ever imagined possible. That's why, as I stood in the doorway of our bedroom, phone in hand, watching my husband of 7 years with my best friend of 12 years, I realized that everything I'd done to protect our relationship had been protecting a relationship that didn't actually exist. What happened next would reveal just how much danger I'd been in without ever knowing it. It took a lot of care and time to prepare and narrate this for you, so if you're enjoying it, a quick subscribe really helps and means the world to us. All right, let's get back to it. The sound of my heels on the marble foyer must have been drowned out by their conversation, because neither Devin nor Natasha noticed me as I climbed the stairs to our bedroom. What I heard through the crack in the door made my blood run cold, but it also awakened something in me that had been dormant for too long. The calculating mind that had built an empire while everyone around me saw only a simple marketing coordinator. "She's so predictable," Natasha was saying, her voice carrying that tone of superiority she'd perfected during our 12 years of friendship. 3 days in Seattle, probably staying at some budget hotel, eating room service, and feeling important because she closed another small-time consulting deal. Devin's laugh was cruel in a way I'd never heard before. The funniest part is how she thinks that marketing job makes her some kind of businesswoman. Cassie's sweet, but she's never understood real money or real power. She's content with her little career and her modest successes. I pressed record on my phone and stepped into the doorway, making sure I had a clear view of both of them. They were sitting on our bed, the $15,000 custom mattress I'd purchased but told Devin was a clearance find, going through what appeared to be financial documents spread across the comforter. "When I file for divorce," Devin continued, "my lawyer is going to be so out of their depth. My attorney says with her income level and no significant assets in her name, I'll keep the house, most of our investments, everything we've built together. She'll get whatever's left of her 401k and maybe some alimony for a few years." Natasha leaned closer to him, her hand resting possessively on his arm. "And once that's settled, we can finally be together openly, start our life with actual financial security instead of pretending her little marketing salary matters." That's when I decided to announce my presence, but not in the way they might have expected. I cleared my throat softly and stepped fully into the room. Both of them spun around with expressions that shifted rapidly from shock to fear to something that looked almost like relief, as if they'd been waiting for this confrontation. "Well," I said, my voice perfectly calm as I continued recording, "this is certainly illuminating. Though I have to say, you're both operating under some interesting assumptions about my financial situation." Devin immediately went into damage control mode, jumping up from the bed and scattering the papers. "Cassie, you're home early. This isn't what it looks like. Natasha and I were just planning my financial destruction, because from what I just heard, it sounds like you've been consulting with divorce attorneys and making calculations based on what you believe my assets to be worth." Natasha's face had gone pale, but she still had the audacity to try her usual manipulation tactics. "Cassandra, sweetie, you're misunderstanding the situation. Devin and I have been worried about you. You've been working so hard, traveling so much. We thought maybe you needed someone to help you understand your financial options." I looked at both of them for a long moment, noting how they stood close together, how comfortable they seemed in my bedroom, and how thoroughly they had planned what they believed would be my downfall. Then I smiled, and something about that smile made them both take a step backwards. "That's very thoughtful of you both," I said, settling into the antique armchair by our window, a chair I'd bought at auction for $12,000, but told Devin came from a thrift store. "Since you're both so concerned about my financial literacy, maybe I should call my wealth management team for some advice. The number I dialed connected immediately. Good afternoon. This is Cassandra Thorne. I need to speak with Jonathan immediately about some urgent personal matters that might affect my portfolio positioning. Devin and Natasha exchanged glances, clearly confused by the professional tone of my conversation and the fact that someone was apparently taking my call seriously enough to put me through immediately to someone important. Yes, Jonathan, I'm fine, I continued, watching their faces as I spoke. I'm calling because I've encountered a situation that might require some strategic asset protection measures. Can you have the legal team prepare some preliminary documentation? I may need to make some significant changes to my holding structure. There was a pause as Jonathan spoke, and I could see Devin straining to hear the other side of the conversation. No, the Seattle acquisition went perfectly. Pemberton Industries is officially under our umbrella as of this morning. But I've got a more personal issue that might require some creative solutions. That's when I saw the first flicker of uncertainty cross Devin's face. Pemberton Industries was a company he knew, a major regional development firm that Sterling Properties had been trying to partner with for years. I understand the documentation will take some time to prepare, I said, standing up and walking to our bedroom window, which offered a perfect view of the Millfield Heights neighborhood, where houses routinely sold for over $2 million. But I think it's important that certain people understand exactly what they're dealing with before they make any irreversible decisions. As I ended the call, I turned back to face them both. The confidence they'd radiated moments earlier was beginning to crack, replaced with something that looked suspiciously like worry. Now then, I said, settling back into my chair with the same calm demeanor I used in boardrooms when I was about to destroy a competitor's negotiating position, where exactly did we leave off in this fascinating conversation about my limited financial prospects? The silence that followed my phone call stretched for nearly 30 seconds, during which I watched Devin and Natasha's faces cycle through confusion, concern, and the first stirrings of genuine fear. They were clearly trying to process what they'd just heard, but their understanding of my life was so fundamentally wrong that they couldn't quite grasp the implications. Devin was the first to break the silence, his voice carrying a forced casualness that didn't match the uncertainty in his eyes. Cassie, what was that about? Pemberton Industries? That's a major company. Why would you be talking about acquisitions? I looked at him with the same expression I'd perfected during hostile takeover negotiations. Calm, patient, and completely in control. Oh, that. Well, since you've both been so interested in my financial situation, I suppose it's time I shared some details you might find relevant. I walked over to our walk-in closet and retrieved a leather portfolio from behind what Devin believed were my work clothes. In reality, the modest blouses and simple skirts he saw hanging there were carefully chosen costumes for my marketing coordinator role, while my actual business wardrobe, the designer suits I wore to board meetings and investor presentations, were kept in a climate-controlled closet in my private office downtown. You see, I began, opening the portfolio and spreading several documents across our bed, pushing aside the divorce planning materials they'd been reviewing. There seems to have been some confusion about exactly what I do for work. The first document I placed on the bed was a letter from Goldman Sachs congratulating Apex Strategic Holdings on our successful acquisition of 3 manufacturing companies in the Pacific Northwest. The second was a Forbes article from 18 months ago titled The Anonymous Mogul: How One Woman Built a $200 million Empire in Plain Sight, with my photograph prominently displayed above the headline. Natasha picked up the Forbes article with trembling hands, her eyes scanning the text before looking up at me with an expression of complete bewilderment. This can't be real. Cassandra, you work for marketing for that consulting firm? You've told us about your projects, your clients, your travel schedule? All true, I confirmed, settling back into my chair. I do have clients, and I do travel extensively for business. I just never mentioned that my clients include Fortune 500 companies seeking strategic partnerships, and my business travel involves things like flying to Switzerland to negotiate international acquisitions or visiting manufacturing facilities I'm considering purchasing. Devin was staring at a bank statement I'd included in the portfolio, his face growing paler by the second. This says your personal account balance is, he stopped, apparently unable to say the number out loud, 47 million as of yesterday's close, though that's just my liquid assets. The real estate portfolio, business holdings, and investment accounts bring the total somewhat higher. I pulled out my tablet and opened an app that Devin had never seen before, a real-time dashboard showing the performance of all my holdings. This is Apex Strategic Holdings' current valuation. As you can see, we closed the Pemberton Industries acquisition this morning for $85 million. It was actually a relatively small purchase for us, but Pemberton had some intellectual property rights we needed for a larger project. The blood had completely drained from Devin's face. Sterling Properties, the company where he worked as a mid-level developer, had been trying to secure a partnership with Pemberton Industries for over 2 years. He'd spent countless evenings complaining about how Pemberton's executives were too arrogant to work with smaller firms like Sterling. "But how?" he whispered, sinking onto the bed beside the scattered documents. "How is this possible? We've been married for 7 years. We share bank accounts. I've seen your pay stubs, your tax returns." "You've seen exactly what I wanted you to see," I replied, my voice gentle but firm. "The marketing coordinator job is real. It's actually a consulting position I created through one of my subsidiary companies. The pay stubs, the tax returns, the modest lifestyle, all of it was carefully constructed to allow me to live normally while building something extraordinary." Natasha was frantically scrolling through the Forbes article on her phone, apparently fact-checking what she was seeing. "It says here that you started your company 5 years ago with inherited money and built it into one of the most successful private equity firms in the region. It says you own properties in 6 states and have controlling interests in companies across multiple industries." 7 states now, actually. I bought a commercial complex in Colorado last month. And we've expanded into renewable energy, which is proving quite profitable. I walked to our bedroom window and gestured toward the neighborhood spread out below us. This house, for instance. Devin, you've been so proud of how we've stretched our budget to afford living in Millfield Heights, but the truth is, I bought this house outright with cash. The mortgage you think we're paying? Those monthly transfers go into an investment account I established in your name. You've actually been building wealth without knowing it." Devin's hands were shaking as he picked up another document from the portfolio. "This is a deed. It says you own 3 properties in downtown Millfield, including—" He stopped reading and looked up at me with growing horror. "Including the building where Sterling Properties has their offices? 4th floor, northwest corner. Your lease comes up for renewal next month, actually. I've been thinking about raising the rent, but I suppose that depends on how this conversation goes." The implications were crashing over them both like successive waves. Not only was I not the financially naive marketing coordinator they'd been plotting to exploit, I was actually their financial superior in ways they were still struggling to comprehend. "The cars," Natasha said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your Honda Accord, the one you said was practical and affordable, is registered to one of my companies for tax purposes, though I also own the BMW you've been driving, Devin, and that Mercedes you love so much, Natasha. Interesting coincidence, isn't it?" I returned to my chair and crossed my legs, watching them process information that was reshaping their understanding of reality. The events we attend, the restaurants where we eat, the vacation destinations we visit. I've been funding our entire lifestyle, while you both assumed it was stretching our joint income to the breaking point. Devin was holding his head in his hands now, apparently overwhelmed by the scope of his miscalculation. "But why? Why hide all this? Why live like we were struggling?" "I wanted to know who you really were," I replied, my voice growing colder. "I wanted a marriage based on love, not financial opportunity. I wanted friends who valued me for myself, not for what I could provide them. I wanted to build authentic relationships with people who saw value in Cassandra, the person, not Cassandra, the portfolio." I gestured toward the divorce papers scattered across our bed. "And now I know exactly what I've built instead." The room fell silent again as the full weight of their situation became clear. They had been plotting to take advantage of someone they believed was financially vulnerable, only to discover they were actually planning to attack someone who could destroy their lives without breaking a sweat. But their humiliation was just beginning. As the reality of my financial position began to sink in, I could see both Devin and Natasha's minds racing, trying to process information that contradicted everything they thought they knew about me. But I wasn't finished with my revelations. What they'd learned so far was just the surface level of how thoroughly they had misjudged their situation. I reached for my phone again, this time opening a different app, one that provided real-time access to security footage from properties I owned throughout Millfield. Since we're sharing information today, I think you'll find this particularly interesting. The first video I pulled up showed the exterior of an upscale restaurant called Meridian Bistro, where Devin had told me he was having business dinners twice a week for the past 3 months. The timestamp showed last Tuesday evening, and there was Devin, clearly visible, walking into the restaurant hand in hand with Natasha. "I own Meridian Bistro," I said conversationally, watching their faces as they recognized themselves on the screen. "Bought it 6 months ago, as part of a hospitality portfolio expansion. The management sends me weekly reports on notable guests, especially ones who specifically request private dining rooms."
I scrolled to another video, this one from the interior security cameras, showing Devin and Natasha sharing an intimate dinner, feeding each other dessert, behaving like lovers rather than the concerned friends they'd pretended to be around me. Natasha's face had gone completely white. "You've been watching us?" "I've been protecting my investments," I corrected. When you own multiple properties in a city, you tend to notice patterns, like how my husband has been taking my supposed best friend to romantic dinners at my restaurant, using credit cards linked to accounts I fund, while telling me he's working late on important projects. I swiped to a new set of images, these from the parking garage beneath the Grandview Hotel, another property in my portfolio. The photo showed Devin's BMW, the one I'd been making payments on, parked next to Natasha's Mercedes in what appeared to be a reserved section. "The Grandview Hotel," I continued, my voice remaining perfectly steady, "has been quite profitable since I acquired it last year. The penthouse suite in particular generates excellent revenue, though I did notice some unusual booking patterns. It seems someone has been reserving it every Thursday afternoon for the past 4 months, paying cash, registering under false names." I opened another app and displayed the hotel's booking system on my tablet screen. Here, we can see Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, who coincidentally drive vehicles matching your license plate numbers and whose physical descriptions match you both perfectly. Devin was staring at the evidence with the expression of someone watching their entire world collapse. "How long have you known?" The better question is, how long have I been documenting it? I opened a cloud storage folder labeled Insurance Materials and began scrolling through hundreds of files. Phone records showing your private conversations, credit card statements revealing purchases you thought I couldn't track, text messages between you two that you believed were secure. The text messages were particularly damning. I selected a few choice examples and began reading them aloud. From Natasha to Devin, 3 weeks ago. "She's so clueless about what we are doing. Sometimes I feel guilty about how easy this is." From Devin to Natasha, last Tuesday, "Once the divorce is finalized, we won't have to pretend anymore. Her lawyer won't know what hit them." I looked up from my phone to see them both frozen in horror. From Natasha to Devin, yesterday. "Make sure you get copies of all her financial documents. My dad's lawyer says the more proof we have of her limited assets, the better our position will be." That last message made Devin's betrayal even more calculated. He hadn't just been cheating, he'd been actively working to gather intelligence for use against me in divorce proceedings, believing he was preparing to take everything from a woman who had no resources to fight back. "Speaking of your father's lawyer," I said, turning to Natasha, "I think you should know that Harrison and Associates, the law firm where your father works as a partner, is housed in a building I purchased last month. I've been reviewing their client list as part of my due diligence, and I found it interesting that they've been developing a divorce strategy for a case involving someone named Devin Blackthorne." Natasha's jaw dropped. She obviously had no idea that her father's firm was now, technically, working in a building I owned, or that I had access to information about their client strategies as part of my property management rights. The preliminary case notes are right here, including their strategy for asset division and their assessment that I would likely settle quickly rather than engage in prolonged litigation. I pulled up another document on my tablet. What's particularly interesting is their fee structure. They're working on a contingency basis, expecting to take a percentage of whatever assets they help Devin acquire in the divorce. It's almost like they're all betting on the same horse without realizing the race is already over. Devin was now sitting on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands, apparently overwhelmed by the scope of evidence I had accumulated. This is insane. You've been living a completely double life for years. No, I corrected firmly. I've been living an authentic life while providing you with the illusion of financial limitation. The double life belongs to you two. I've never lied about my feelings, my commitment to our marriage, or my friendship. I simply didn't advertise my net worth. I opened one more folder on my tablet, this one labeled Legal Preparations. What I have been doing, however, is preparing for various contingencies, including the possibility that people I trusted might try to take advantage of what they perceived as my vulnerability. The documents in this folder represented months of strategic preparation, pretrial agreement modifications that Devin had signed without reading carefully, thinking they were routine insurance updates, financial structures that protected my assets from any kind of legal challenge, investment strategies that had been steadily transferring shared assets into accounts where Devin had signing authority but no withdrawal rights, building his net worth while protecting my primary holdings.
You see, I explained, watching their faces as they processed this information, I've actually been making you both wealthier over the past several years. Devin, those investment accounts you think belong to both of us, the ones you've been calculating as part of your potential divorce settlement, they're entirely in your name, funded by my companies, but structured so that accessing them without my authorization would constitute fraud. I scrolled to another section. And Natasha, that consulting work you've been doing for what you thought were small marketing firms, those were actually contracts with my subsidiary companies. You've been working for me, indirectly, for over 2 years. The skills you've been developing, the professional network you've been building, the reputation you've been establishing, all of it has been funded and facilitated by the woman you've been plotting to help destroy. The irony was almost too perfect. While they'd been scheming to take advantage of my supposed financial weakness, I'd actually been systematically strengthening their positions, building their wealth, and creating opportunities for them, all while documenting their betrayal with the thoroughness of someone who understood that evidence, not emotion, wins legal battles. So, now that we've established the actual financial landscape, I said, closing the tablet and setting it aside, perhaps we should discuss what happens next. The fear in their eyes told me they were finally beginning to understand that they weren't the predators in this situation. They were the prey. The fear in their eyes was exactly what I'd been waiting to see. For months, I'd watched them operate under the assumption that I was financially naive and emotionally vulnerable, never suspecting that every move they made was being carefully observed and documented by someone who understood power dynamics far better than they could imagine. Now that we've established the true nature of our relationships, I said, walking to the mahogany desk in the corner of our bedroom, a piece Devin believed was an expensive splurge we could barely afford, I think it's time we discussed the practical implications of your choices. I opened the desk's hidden compartment, something Devin had never known existed, and withdrew a thick folder marked Contingency Plans, Marriage Dissolution. Inside were documents that would systematically dismantle every assumption they'd made about how a divorce would proceed. Devin, you mentioned earlier that your attorney believes you'll keep the house in a divorce settlement. I placed the first document on the bed between them. This is the actual deed to this property. As you can see, it's held in a trust controlled entirely by Apex Strategic Holdings. You've never had any legal claim to this house. His hands shook as he examined the document. But we've been making mortgage payments together. I've been contributing to the household expenses. You've been making deposits into an investment account I created in your name. Every penny you thought was going toward our shared mortgage has actually been building your personal wealth. The account currently contains over $180,000, all legally yours. I've been making you richer while you planned to make me destitute. I placed another document beside the first. The cars you both drive, the credit cards you use, the insurance policies that protect you, all funded through my companies, but structured to benefit you. Devin, your net worth is actually significantly higher than you realize, thanks to investment strategies I've implemented over the past 7 years. Natasha was staring at a credit card statement that showed her Mercedes payments. You've been paying for my car? Through a subsidiary company that provides vehicle financing. The payments you thought were coming from your own salary were actually being covered by a consulting contract between my marketing firm and your graphic design business. You've been working for me indirectly for over 2 years. The skills you've been developing, the professional network you've been building, the reputation you've been establishing, all of it has been funded and facilitated by the woman you've been plotting to help destroy. But why? Devin asked, his voice breaking. If you were supporting us anyway, why hide it? Why make it so complicated? I sat back down in my chair and regarded them both with the same analytical gaze I used when evaluating potential acquisitions. Because I wanted to see who you really were when you thought you held the power. I wanted to know if your affection for me was genuine, or if it was dependent on what you could gain from our relationship. I opened my tablet again and pulled up a different set of files. For 7 years, Devin, you've told me you loved my independence, my work ethic, my modest approach to life. You said you didn't want a wife who was materialistic or obsessed with status symbols. You claimed you fell in love with me because I was different from other women who only cared about money. The screen showed a compilation of text messages between Devin and Natasha over the past 6 months, messages that revealed a very different perspective. But here's what you really think about the woman you married. From Devin to Natasha 2 months ago, Cassie's so limited in her thinking. She doesn't understand how real wealth works or how to leverage opportunities. Sometimes I wonder what I could accomplish with someone who actually had ambition.
Devin's face crumpled as I continued reading. From Devin to Natasha, 6 weeks ago. She's satisfied with such small achievements. I need someone who thinks bigger, who wants more from life. When this is over, we can finally build something impressive together. I scrolled to another message. And from Natasha to Devin, just last week. She's so grateful for the smallest things. It's almost pathetic how easily pleased she is. You deserve someone who can match your vision and sophistication. The messages painted a clear picture of how they really saw me. Not as someone choosing simplicity from a position of strength, but as someone limited by lack of vision and resources. They'd convinced each other that they were superior beings trapped in relationships with someone who couldn't appreciate their greatness. What's particularly interesting, I continued, is how your opinion of my limitations directly correlates with the financial support you've been receiving. The more I invested in your success, the more you became convinced that you were outgrowing me. I pulled up bank records showing the steady increase in payments to both of them over the past year. As your consulting fees increased, Natasha, your respect for me decreased. As your investment accounts grew, Devin, your appreciation for our marriage diminished. It's almost like you both needed to diminish me psychologically in order to feel entitled to the resources I was providing. Natasha was crying now, mascara streaking down her cheeks as she processed the full scope of how her financial stability had been built on a foundation she'd never acknowledged. I didn't know. I swear I didn't realize the money was coming from you. Of course you didn't. That was the point. I wanted to see if success would make you kinder or crueler.
if financial security would make you more or less loyal. The results have been quite illuminating. I stood and walked to our bedroom window, looking out over the neighborhood where every house represented someone else's idea of success. For the past year, you've both been living the lives you told me you wanted. Devin, you've had the resources to make significant real estate investments and build professional credibility. Natasha, you've had the financial freedom to grow your business and establish yourself in Millfield's creative community. I turned back to face them. But instead of feeling grateful for opportunities you didn't understand you were receiving, you both became resentful of the person you thought was holding you back from even greater achievements. The cruel irony was now impossible for them to ignore. They had been plotting to escape what they saw as the limitation of being connected to me, never realizing that their connection to me was the source of everything they'd accomplished. So now we come to the central question, I said, returning to my chair. What exactly did you think would happen when you destroyed the person who was actually funding your success? The silence that followed was broken only by Natasha's quiet sobbing and the sound of Devin frantically shuffling through the documents scattered across our bed, as if hoping to find some piece of information that would make sense of the impossible situation they'd created for themselves. They were beginning to understand that their betrayal wasn't just morally wrong, it was financially suicidal. The realization of their complete financial dependence on me was still sinking in when I decided it was time to show them what strategic consequences looked like. I'd spent 7 years building systems that could support the people I loved, but those same systems could be dismantled with surgical precision when those people proved unworthy of that support. I picked up my secure phone and began making calls while they watched. Each conversation designed to systematically remove every financial advantage I'd quietly provided them over the years. "Good afternoon, Rebecca," I said into the phone, speaking to the manager of Hartwell and Associates, the subsidiary company that employed Natasha as a graphic designer. "I need to discuss some immediate changes to our consulting contracts. Yes, I'm aware it's sudden, but circumstances have changed." Natasha's eyes widened as she realized what was happening. Her graphic design work, which she'd believed was thriving based on her own talent and reputation, was about to evaporate. "I need to terminate the Morrison account immediately," I continued, watching Natasha's face grow pale. The Morrison account was her largest client, representing nearly 60% of her monthly income. "And the Blackwood Industries contract as well. Actually, let's suspend all new project assignments until further notice." I ended the call and immediately dialed another number. "Thomas, this is Cassandra. I need you to review the vehicle financing contracts for both units we discussed previously. Yes, the BMW and the Mercedes. I want both loans recalled immediately with full payment required within 48 hours. Devin had been leaning forward, straining to hear my conversations, but now he slumped back against our headboard. The BMW he'd been so proud of, the car that had given him credibility in his professional circles, would be repossessed unless he could produce nearly $30,000 he didn't actually have.
"Which I wrote," I interrupted calmly, pulling out copies of the agreements he'd signed over the years. "Every contract, every loan document, every investment arrangement contains clauses that allow me to recall funds or terminate services based on material changes in circumstances. Infidelity and fraud certainly qualify as material changes." I dialed a third number, this one connecting me to the property management company that oversaw Natasha's apartment. "Hello, this is Cassandra Thorne from Apex Strategic Holdings. I need to discuss the lease guarantee we've been providing for Unit 4B at Riverside Towers." Natasha's breathing became rapid and shallow as she realized what was coming next. Her luxury apartment, which she'd been able to afford because I'd been quietly guaranteeing her lease and subsidizing her rent, was about to become financially impossible for her to maintain. "Please terminate our guarantee effective immediately," I continued. The tenant will need to provide alternative financial assurance or vacate the premises according to standard lease terms. As I ended that call, Natasha finally found her voice. Cassandra, please, this is destroying everything I've worked for. My business, my home, my car. Your business was my business, I corrected. Your home was subsidized by my guarantee. Your car was financed through my company. What exactly did you work for that wasn't ultimately dependent on my resources? I opened my laptop and pulled up real-time dashboards showing the financial changes taking effect. Within the next 2 hours, Natasha, you'll receive termination notices for all your major consulting contracts. By tomorrow morning, your car loan will be in default. By the end of the week, you'll need to either pay your apartment rent in full or find alternative housing. Devin was frantically calculating numbers on his phone, apparently trying to figure out how much money he actually had access to without my systems supporting him. The investment accounts you showed me earlier, those are still in my name, right? You said they were legally mine. They are, I confirmed, but accessing them requires dual authorization, which means my electronic signature as well as yours. Given current circumstances, I think you'll find me less cooperative about approving withdrawals. I pulled up the investment account interface and showed them the authorization protocols. Every significant transaction required approval from both account holders, which meant Devin could see his net worth but couldn't actually access it without my consent. That's not legal, he said desperately. You can't just freeze accounts that belong to me. I'm not freezing anything, I replied. I'm simply exercising my rights as co-administrator of accounts that were established to facilitate our marriage. If you'd like to dispute an arrangement, you're welcome to engage legal counsel, though I should mention that any attorney you hire will need to be paid from resources you can actually access. The elegance of the system I'd created was becoming clear to them both. Every financial advantage they'd enjoyed was interconnected, creating a web of dependency that couldn't be untangled without my cooperation. Devin couldn't afford a divorce attorney without access to the investment accounts I controlled. Natasha couldn't maintain her lifestyle without the consulting contracts I was terminating. Neither of them could continue their affair without the resources I'd been providing to fund their secret meetings. I made one final call, this one to the Grandview Hotel where they'd been conducting their Thursday afternoon liaisons. Hello, this is Cassandra Thorne. I need to make some changes to the penthouse suite booking policies. Please flag the names Johnson, Smith, and Davidson as unauthorized users. Any future reservation attempts under those names should be declined. I looked up to see them both staring at me with expressions of growing panic. I should also mention that the private dining room at Meridian Bistro, where you've been having your romantic dinners, is no longer available for reservation by unauthorized parties. The management has been instructed to implement stricter guest verification procedures. The systematic removal of their infrastructure was creating immediate practical problems. Without subsidized income, Natasha couldn't afford her apartment or car payments. Without access to the investment accounts, Devin couldn't afford to leave me or fight me legally. Without the hotel and restaurant reservations, they couldn't even continue their affair in the comfort they'd grown accustomed to. This is psychological torture, Natasha said, her voice breaking. You're systematically destroying our lives. I'm systematically removing my support from people who were systematically planning to destroy mine. The difference is that you were targeting someone you believed was vulnerable and defenseless. I'm responding to people who proved they were willing to exploit what they perceived as weakness. I closed my laptop and looked at them both with the same clinical detachment I used when shutting down underperforming business units. You spent months calculating how to take everything from me, based on the assumption that I had nothing to fight back with. Now you're discovering what it feels like to have everything taken from you by someone who actually understands how power works. Devin was scrolling through his phone contacts, apparently looking for someone who might be able to help them navigate this crisis. There has to be something we can do. Some legal recourse, some way to challenge this.
With what resources? I asked. The lawyers you'd need to hire cost more per hour than either of you makes in a week, from sources that aren't connected to me. The financial experts who might advise you work for firms that do business with my companies. Even if you found independent counsel, they'd need retainers you can't afford and would be facing legal teams I've been building relationships with for years. The trap was perfect in its simplicity. They'd become so dependent on my financial ecosystem that removing my support didn't just make them poorer, it made them powerless to fight back against the removal itself. But their humiliation was far from complete. The financial consequences I'd set in motion were only the beginning. Within hours of my systematic dismantling of their support systems, Devin and Natasha began their desperate counterattack, and it was even more pathetic than I'd anticipated. My phone started buzzing with calls around 6 p.m. The first was from Devin's mother, Eleanor Blackthorne, a woman who had never particularly liked me, but had always been polite for her son's sake. "Cassandra, dear," her voice carried that fake sweetness that barely concealed her disdain, "Devin has told me about your episode today. He's very concerned about your mental state. Perhaps you should consider getting some professional help before you do something you'll regret." I put the call on speaker so Devin and Natasha could hear my response. They were still in our bedroom, frantically making calls of their own, apparently coordinating their strategy to paint me as mentally unstable. "Hello, Eleanor," I replied calmly. It's interesting that Devin would frame my discovery of his affair as a mental health episode. Did he mention that I caught him planning my financial destruction with my former best friend? There was a pause before Eleanor's voice returned, sharper now. "Devin has explained that you've been having delusions about wealth and success. He's worried that the stress of your little job has made you paranoid and vindictive." "My little job," I repeated, opening my laptop to pull up some financial documents. "Eleanor, are you familiar with Riverside Medical Center, where you've been receiving treatment for your arthritis?" "Of course, but what does that have to do with—" "I acquired the controlling interest in Riverside Medical Center 8 months ago. The excellent care you've been receiving, the specialists who've been managing your treatment plan, the reduced fees you've been paying through their financial assistance program, all possible because your son's wife owns the facility." The silence on the other end of the line was profound. Eleanor's medical bills had been devastating before she'd qualified for what she thought was a charitable assistance program at Riverside Medical Center. She had no idea that her relief from crippling medical debt was the direct result of my intervention. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Devin said you work in marketing for some small firm." "Devin says a lot of things that aren't true," I replied. "Would you like me to send you the acquisition paperwork? Or perhaps you'd prefer to see the documentation showing how I've personally ensured your medical treatments remain affordable?" I could hear Devin in the background, apparently trying to take the phone from his mother, but she was demanding explanations. Their whispered argument was audible through the speaker before Eleanor returned to the call. "Even if that's true," she said, her voice now uncertain, "that doesn't excuse your vindictive behavior. Taking away Devin's car, threatening his livelihood, that's not how a loving wife handles marital problems." "You're absolutely right," I agreed. "A loving wife would never handle problems this way. Just like a loving husband would never plan to financially destroy his wife while conducting an affair with her best friend. I suppose we're all learning new things about each other today." After ending that call, the next wave of attacks began. Natasha had apparently reached out to several mutual friends, and they began calling to express their concern about my behavior. Each conversation followed the same pattern. They'd heard I was having some kind of breakdown and was lashing out at innocent people over some misunderstanding. The third call came from Jessica Martinez, someone I'd considered a close friend for over 5 years. "Cassie, honey, Natasha is really worried about you. She says you've been making wild accusations and threatening to destroy people's lives over some misunderstanding." "Interesting interpretation," I said, putting this call on speaker as well. "Jessica, what exactly did Natasha tell you happened today?"
She said you came home early from a work trip and flew into a rage when she found her and Devin going over some financial documents to help you with your budget. She's concerned work stress has made you paranoid and aggressive. I looked at Devin and Natasha, noting how they'd stopped their own phone calls to listen to this conversation. Their version of events was remarkably creative, casting themselves as concerned friends trying to help me manage my finances, and me as an unstable woman who'd misinterpreted their good intentions. "That's a fascinating story," I replied. "Did she also mention the hotel receipts I found? The ones showing they've been booking rooms together every Thursday for 4 months?"
She explained that, Jessica said quickly. They've been meeting to plan a surprise for you, some kind of financial intervention because they were worried about your spending habits. The manipulation was breathtaking in its audacity. They were actually trying to frame their affair as an elaborate surprise party and their divorce planning as financial counseling? "Jessica," I said calmly, "I'm going to text you something. After you read it, I'd like you to tell me if you still think they were planning a surprise party." I sent her screenshots of the text messages I'd captured earlier, the ones where Devin and Natasha discussed how clueless I was about their relationship and how easy it would be to take my assets in a divorce. The silence stretched for nearly 2 minutes before Jessica's voice returned, much quieter now. "Cassie, these messages... This isn't what Natasha told me at all." "No, I imagine it wasn't. Just like she probably didn't mention that her thriving graphic design business has been entirely subsidized by my companies, or that Devin's investment portfolio was built with money I've been transferring into his accounts for years." After Jessica hung up, apparently needing time to process what she'd learned, the calls intensified. Devin had reached out to his colleagues at Sterling Properties, painting me as a vengeful spouse who was making false claims about wealth I didn't possess. Within an hour, I received a call from Marcus Reed, Devin's boss and the senior partner at Sterling Properties. "Mrs. Blackthorne," his voice was professionally stern, "Devin has informed me that you've been making threats related to his employment and our office lease. I want you to know that Sterling Properties doesn't respond well to intimidation tactics." "Mr. Reed, I think there may be some confusion. I haven't made any threats. I've simply informed my husband that I own the building where his company leases office space, and that his behavior might affect our landlord-tenant relationship." "You don't own our building," Marcus said with obvious disdain. "Our lease is with Meridian Property Holdings, a major commercial real estate firm. Devin said you've been having delusions about owning various properties around town." I opened my laptop and pulled up the corporate structure documents. "Mr. Reed, Meridian Property Holdings is a subsidiary of Apex Strategic Holdings, which I own entirely. Your lease agreement is ultimately with me, though it's administered through several corporate layers for tax purposes." I could hear his skepticism in his voice. "Even if that were true, which I doubt, threatening our lease over personal marital issues would be legally problematic for you." "You're absolutely right," I agreed, "which is why I haven't threatened anything. I've simply noted that when one of my tenants is using company resources to plan fraudulent legal action against me, it raises questions about their judgment and integrity. Whether that affects future lease negotiations is a business decision I'll make based on objective factors." The call ended abruptly, but within 30 minutes, Marcus had apparently done some research of his own. When he called back, his tone had changed dramatically. "Mrs. Blackthorne, I need to apologize. I've just spoken with our corporate attorney, and he's confirmed that you are indeed our ultimate landlord. I had no idea about your business holdings." "Very few people do. I prefer to keep my professional and personal lives separate. Unfortunately, recent events have made that impossible." As the evening progressed, the pattern became clear. Devin and Natasha had launched a coordinated campaign to portray me as mentally unstable, hoping that if enough people believed I was having a breakdown, they could somehow invalidate the evidence I'd gathered or the consequences I had implemented.
But each person they contacted either discovered the truth independently or received documentation from me that exposed their lies. Their character assassination campaign was backfiring spectacularly, turning their own support network against them as people realized they'd been manipulated into supporting adultery and fraud. By midnight, they were no longer making calls. They were desperately trying to figure out how to salvage a situation that was spiraling completely out of their control. By Wednesday morning, the truth had spread through Millfield's social and professional networks like wildfire. What Devin and Natasha had intended as a coordinated character assassination campaign had instead become their own public exposure, as each person they had contacted began independently verifying my claims and sharing what they had learned. The first indication of how completely the narrative had shifted came at 7 a.m. when my phone rang with a call from Patricia Summers, the president of the Millfield Chamber of Commerce. I had met her several times at charity events, always in my role as Devin's supportive wife, never revealing my business connections. Dr. Thorne, she began, using a title that made Devin, who was still in our guest bedroom, look up sharply from his phone. I hope you'll forgive the early call, but I felt it was important to reach out personally after learning about your situation. I put the call on speaker, curious to see how the story had evolved overnight. Please call me Cassandra. What situation are you referring to? Your husband's attempts to defraud you through false divorce proceedings, Patricia said bluntly. Marcus Reed called an emergency board meeting last night after discovering that one of his employees had been planning to financially exploit the woman who actually owns their office building. The business community is appalled.
Devin's face had gone completely white. The Chamber of Commerce represented every major business owner and professional in Millfield, and their disapproval could destroy his career prospects permanently. I want you to know, Patricia continued, that the Chamber stands ready to provide whatever support you need. We had no idea we had such a successful entrepreneur in our community, and we're horrified that you've been subjected to this kind of betrayal. After hanging up with Patricia, the calls continued. Dr. Amanda Foster, the chief administrator at Riverside Medical Center, called to express gratitude for my acquisition of the hospital and to apologize for not recognizing me at previous community events. The mayor's office reached out to invite me to join the Economic Development Committee. 3 different law firms contacted me to offer their services, apparently eager to represent someone with my resources and community standing. Each call reinforced the same message. Millfield's power structure had realigned overnight, and I was now recognized as one of the most influential residents in the city, while Devin and Natasha were being treated as social pariahs who had attempted to defraud a respected businesswoman. The most satisfying call came from Harrison and Associates, the law firm where Natasha's father worked and where Devin's divorce strategy had been developed. Jonathan Harrison himself, the senior partner, was on the line, his voice carefully controlled but obviously strained. Ms. Thorne, I'm calling to inform you that we are immediately withdrawing from representation of Mr. Blackthorne. It has come to our attention that the case was predicated on materially false information about your financial status. I could hear Devin in the background frantically trying to get my attention, apparently wanting to speak with Harrison directly, but I continued the conversation calmly. I appreciate your professionalism, Mr. Harrison. I understand Mr. Blackthorne provided incomplete information about our marital assets. That's, one way to put it, Harrison replied dryly. Miss Thorne, I need to ask directly, are you planning any legal action related to the attempted fraud? Our firm needs to assess potential liability issues. The question hung in the air like a sword over everyone who had participated in Devin's scheme. Harrison and Associates could face serious professional consequences for participating in what was now clearly revealed as an attempted fraud case. I'm still evaluating my options, I replied honestly. Much will depend on how various parties choose to conduct themselves going forward. After ending that call, I walked into the guest bedroom where Devin had spent the night, banished from our master suite.
He was sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at his phone with the expression of someone watching his entire life collapse in real time. Every law firm in the city has turned me down. They all say representing me would create a conflict of interest because they do business with your companies. That's unfortunate, though I imagine it's nothing compared to what Natasha is experiencing. Devin's phone buzzed with a text message, and his face somehow grew even paler as he read it. She's being evicted. The landlord moved up her timeline after discovering that her lease guarantee was terminated. She has 48 hours to vacate. I pulled out my tablet and checked the real-time updates from my property management systems. The repossession is scheduled for this afternoon. Apparently, she doesn't have the resources to bring the loan current. The systematic collapse was proceeding exactly as designed. Without the financial scaffolding I'd provided, neither Devin nor Natasha could maintain their lifestyles for more than a few days. But the social consequences were proving even more devastating than the financial ones. Devin's phone rang, and he answered it with desperate hope, apparently thinking someone might finally be willing to help him. His face fell as he listened to the caller. That was my brother. He heard about everything from his wife, who heard it at her book club this morning. He says the family is disappointed in my choices and thinks I should accept responsibility for my actions, rather than expecting help. Even his own family was abandoning him as the truth spread. The story had apparently reached beyond Millfield's professional networks into social circles, church groups, and family connections. Everywhere Devin and Natasha had expected support, they were finding judgment instead. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica Martinez, the friend who had initially called to express concern about my supposed breakdown. Cassie, I owe you a huge apology. I had lunch with 3 other women today, and we've been comparing notes about what Devin and Natasha told each of us. They gave everyone different versions of the story, all designed to make you look unstable. We feel horrible for believing them. I showed Devin the message, watching as he realized that his character assassination campaign had been so poorly coordinated that the inconsistencies in their stories exposed their deception. "How did you know?" he asked quietly. "How did you know they would turn on each other once people started comparing stories?"
Because lies require perfect coordination to maintain, and liars are fundamentally selfish, I replied. When people are willing to betray someone they claim to love, they'll ultimately betray anyone when it serves their interests. I just had to create enough pressure for their true characters to emerge. My tablet chimed with a notification from my security system. The cameras at Natasha's apartment building showed her loading boxes into a small rental truck, apparently moving out ahead of her eviction deadline. Her designer clothes had been replaced with jeans and a t-shirt. Her perfectly styled hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she was crying as she worked. "She looks broken," Devin observed, watching the footage over my shoulder. "She looks like someone facing the natural consequences of her choices," I corrected. For the first time in years, she's experiencing what life is like without someone else subsidizing her existence. Devin was quiet for several minutes, apparently processing the scope of his miscalculation. Finally, he looked up at me with something that might have been genuine remorse. "What would it take? What would I have to do to make this right?" I considered his question carefully. After 7 years of marriage and months of systematic betrayal, was there anything he could do to repair the damage he'd caused? "That's an interesting question," I replied. "But before we discuss what you might do to make things right, I think you need to understand just how wrong things actually are." Because what Devin didn't know yet was that his betrayal had been even more extensive than he realized, and the evidence I'd gathered went far beyond anything I'd shown him so far. The real devastation was still coming. What Devin didn't realize was that his question about making things right had just triggered the release of information I'd been holding back. Evidence so damaging that everything he'd experienced so far would seem like a gentle warning compared to what was about to be revealed.
I opened a secure folder on my tablet, one labeled Deep Background Investigation, and began scrolling through documents that would expose the true scope of his betrayal. Before we discuss redemption, Devin, I think you should understand exactly what you're asking to be forgiven for. The first document I showed him was a financial analysis conducted by my security team 3 months ago, when I'd first begun to suspect something was wrong. This is a complete audit of every financial transaction you've made in the past 2 years, cross-reference with your stated activities and whereabouts. Devin's eyes widened as he saw the thoroughness of the investigation. Every credit card purchase, every cash withdrawal, every electronic payment had been analyzed and categorized. The pattern that emerged was devastating. The affair with Natasha started 18 months ago, not 4 months as you've been claiming. Your first hotel room together was at the Grandview in March of last year. You paid cash, but the parking garage cameras captured your license plates. And the timing coincides with when you told me you were working late on the Morrison project. I scrolled to another section of the report. But Natasha wasn't your first affair, was it, Devin? The color drained completely from his face. What do you mean? I mean Rebecca Chen from your office. The business dinners you had with her 6 times between January and May of last year. Always at restaurants where you specifically requested private booths, always paid for with cash to avoid leaving credit card records. I pulled up surveillance photos from 3 different restaurants showing Devin with a young woman from Sterling Properties, their body language clearly intimate rather than professional. Rebecca lasted about 4 months before you moved on to Natasha. I'm curious, did you get bored with her, or did she start expecting more commitment than you were willing to provide? Devin was staring at the evidence with the expression of someone watching their carefully constructed lies crumble into dust. How long have you been investigating me? I replied, since the moment your behavior patterns changed. Did you really think I built a multi-million-dollar company by ignoring obvious warning signs? When someone who claims to love me starts lying about their whereabouts and expenses, I investigate. I opened another folder, this one containing information that made Devin physically recoil from the screen. But the affairs were just symptoms of a larger pattern, weren't they, Devin? The real issue is your gambling addiction. The evidence was comprehensive and damning. Credit card advances at 3 different casinos, private poker games in the back rooms of high-end restaurants, online betting accounts linked to email addresses I'd traced back to him. Over the past 2 years, Devin had lost nearly $85,000 in gambling debts. The investment accounts I've been funding weren't just building your net worth. You've been systematically draining them to cover gambling losses. The authorization system I mentioned, I implemented 6 months ago when I noticed irregular withdrawal patterns. Devin was shaking now, apparently realizing that I'd been aware of his gambling problem long before I discovered his affairs. Cassie, I can explain.
You can explain how you stole from your wife to fund your addiction while planning to divorce her to cover your debts? I interrupted. Because that's what this divorce was really about, wasn't it? You needed access to assets you believed I had, and you needed to eliminate any legal claim I might have on property you thought belonged to both of us. I pulled up another document, this one showing the true scope of Devin's financial desperation. You owe money to some very unpleasant people, don't you? Marcus Volkov from the underground poker games at the Riverside Club? Tony Marchetti from the sports betting operation downtown? These aren't the kind of creditors who accept payment plans. The fear in Devin's eyes confirmed what my investigation had revealed. His gambling debts weren't just financial problems, they were physical safety issues. The kind of people he owed money to had a reputation for collecting debts through violence when necessary. The affair with Natasha wasn't about love, I continued, watching him carefully. It was about recruitment. You needed someone to help you access my financial information, someone who could get close enough to me to gather intelligence about my assets and vulnerabilities.
I scrolled to a series of text messages between Devin and Natasha that painted an even darker picture of their relationship. From Devin to Natasha 8 months ago. I need you to find out more about Cassie's work situation. There might be money there we don't know about. From Natasha to Devin 6 months ago. She's definitely hiding something. Her travel schedule doesn't match what she tells us about her job. The messages revealed a calculated campaign to infiltrate my life and extract information. Natasha hadn't been seduced by Devin. She'd been recruited as an intelligence asset in his scheme to access my wealth. But the most interesting discovery, I said, opening a final folder, was what happened when your plans started to fall apart. The documents in this folder showed that Devin had been making increasingly desperate moves as his gambling debts mounted and his timeline for accessing my assets compressed. He'd taken out secret loans against property he didn't own, forged my signature on financial documents, and even attempted to use my identity to secure credit lines. Identity theft, forgery, fraud, I listed calmly. These aren't marital problems, Devin. These are felonies, multiple felonies, each carrying potential prison sentences. I pulled up copies of loan applications where Devin had claimed to own properties that belonged to me, using forged documents to support his claims. The applications had been rejected because the financial institutions had conducted proper due diligence, but the attempts themselves constituted criminal fraud. The reason you've been so desperate to control the divorce narrative is because you need to establish legal claim to my assets before your creditors discover that you've been lying about your net worth. If Marcus Volkov finds out you don't actually own the properties you've been using as collateral for your gambling debts, I didn't need to finish the sentence. Devin understood perfectly well what would happen if violent criminals discovered he'd been defrauding them about his ability to pay. So now we come to the real question, I said, closing the tablet and looking at him directly. You asked what it would take to make this right, but I'm curious. What exactly did you think would happen when you destroyed the only person who's been protecting you from the consequences of your own choices? The investigation had revealed something Devin himself didn't fully understand. Every system I'd built to support our marriage had also been protecting him from his own self-destructive behavior. The investment accounts he'd been draining had been refilled automatically by transfers from my companies. The credit monitoring I'd implemented had prevented his identity theft attempts from succeeding. Even the gambling debts he'd accumulated had been manageable only because my financial support had kept his overall debt-to-income ratio from triggering criminal enforcement actions. Without my systems protecting you, how long do you think it will take your creditors to realize that you have no assets to seize, no income to garnish, and no legal claim to the properties you've been using as collateral? Devin was crying now, apparently understanding for the first time that his betrayal hadn't just been morally wrong, it had been suicidal. By trying to destroy me, he'd eliminated his own protection from consequences that had been building for years. Cassie, please, he whispered. I know I've made terrible mistakes. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. But if you cut me off completely, if you expose everything... If I expose everything, you'll face the natural consequences of choices you made entirely on your own. The question is, why should I continue protecting someone who was planning to destroy me? The answer to that question would determine not just Devin's fate, but whether any possibility remained for salvaging something meaningful from the wreckage of our marriage. But first, he would have to prove he understood the difference between asking for mercy and earning redemption. 6 months later, I stood in the executive conference room of Apex Strategic Holdings' new headquarters in downtown Millfield, looking over the city I'd quietly helped shape for years. The building itself was a statement, 42 floors of glass and steel that announced my emergence from the shadows into full recognition as one of the region's most influential business leaders.
The quarterly board meeting had just concluded, and the results were extraordinary. The renewable energy division had exceeded projections by 30%. The medical technology acquisitions were revolutionizing patient care across 4 states. The real estate portfolio had expanded to include landmark properties in 3 major cities.
Everything I'd built while hiding behind the facade of a marketing coordinator was now operating at full capacity, unencumbered by the need for secrecy. But the most significant transformation wasn't in my business empire. It was in the relationships that had emerged from the ashes of my old life. My assistant knocked on the conference room door. "Ms. Thorne, your 3 o'clock appointment is here." The person who entered was barely recognizable as the woman I'd caught in my bedroom 6 months earlier. Natasha looked genuinely healthy for the first time in years. No designer clothes, no excessive makeup, no desperate attempt to project success she couldn't afford. She was wearing simple jeans and a sweater, her hair in a natural style, and most importantly, she was carrying herself with something that looked like actual self-respect. "Thank you for seeing me," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "I know you didn't have to agree to this meeting." "I was curious," I admitted. "Your message said you had something important to discuss, but you've been very careful not to ask for anything over the past 6 months. That's different." The last half year had been a profound education for both Natasha and Devin. Stripped of the financial support they never acknowledged receiving, they'd been forced to confront who they actually were when they couldn't rely on resources they hadn't earned. Natasha had moved back in with her parents initially, a humbling experience that had apparently provided some much-needed perspective. She'd found work at a small marketing firm, not the glamorous creative director position she'd held when I was subsidizing her income, but genuine entry-level work where she had to prove her abilities rather than coast on artificial financial stability. "I wanted to update you on the restitution program," she said, pulling out a folder. "I know you didn't require it, but I've been working with a financial counselor to calculate exactly how much benefit I received from your companies over the years." She handed me a detailed breakdown showing consulting fees, subsidized expenses, and indirect benefits totaling nearly $240,000 over 3 years. The analysis was thorough and honest, showing an understanding of financial accountability I'd never seen from her before. "I've set up a payment plan," she continued. "It will take me 8 years to repay everything at current income levels, but I wanted you to see that I'm committed to making this right." I reviewed her documentation, noting the realistic timeline and the fact that she'd calculated interest on the amounts owed. "This is impressive work, Natasha. But I'm curious. Why? I never demanded restitution, and you could have simply moved on with your life." "Because I needed to understand what I had actually taken from you. Not just the money, but the opportunities, the security, the peace of mind. For 3 years, I lived a life I hadn't earned while convincing myself I deserved it. I need to earn my own life now." She pulled out another document, this one showing her current budget and lifestyle. She was living in a modest apartment, driving a used car, building her career through actual achievement rather than subsidized success. It was the kind of authentic life I'd once hoped she might choose voluntarily. "There's something else," she said, her voice becoming more serious. "I've been working with a therapist to understand why I participated in what Devin planned. What I discovered about myself wasn't pleasant." She handed me a letter she'd written, addressed to me, but apparently never intended for sending. It was a detailed analysis of her own motivations, acknowledging the jealousy, entitlement, and resentment that had driven her betrayal. "I convinced myself that you were limiting my potential," she explained. "Every time you helped me succeed, I resented the help instead of appreciating it. I needed to believe you were holding me back to justify taking from you." The psychological insight was remarkable, showing a level of self-awareness that the old Natasha had never possessed. "And now?" "Now, I understand that you were never limiting me. I was limiting myself by refusing to acknowledge my dependence on your generosity. The life I'm building now is smaller than what I had before, but it's actually mine." As if summoned by our conversation about personal transformation, my phone buzzed with a message from Devin. Over the past 6 months, he'd undergone his own journey of forced accountability, though his path had been considerably more difficult. "How is he doing?" Natasha asked, apparently noticing my phone notification. "Better than expected," I replied honestly. "The gambling addiction treatment program has been successful, and his work with the debt restructuring counselors has prevented the worst-case scenarios we discussed." Devin's transformation had been more dramatic than Natasha's, partly because his consequences had been more severe. The revelation of his gambling debts and criminal behavior had cost him his job at Sterling Properties, But it had also forced him to confront addictions and behavioral patterns that had been destroying his life for years.
I had ultimately decided not to press criminal charges for the identity theft and fraud, partly because prosecution would have made it impossible for him to earn the money needed to address his gambling debts safely. Instead, I'd structured a supervised rehabilitation program that addressed both his addictions and his debts while keeping him out of prison. The construction work has been good for him, I continued, checking another message from his supervisor. Physical labor, regular hours, direct connection between effort and results. He's been clean from gambling for 4 months now. Devin was working for a construction company owned by one of my subsidiary firms, though he didn't know about that connection. The job paid enough to cover basic living expenses and debt payments, while providing the structure and accountability he'd never had in his previous career. "Do you think—" Natasha began, then stopped herself. "I'm sorry, it's not my place to ask." "Go ahead. Do you think there's any possibility of reconciliation? Between you and Devin, I mean? He's changed so much, and I know he's genuinely remorseful." I considered the question seriously. Over the past 6 months, Devin had demonstrated genuine change in ways that went far beyond his letters of apology and requests for forgiveness. He'd entered therapy voluntarily, maintained his sobriety, and worked consistently to address the debts and problems he'd created. Most importantly, he'd done all of this without asking anything from me, apparently understanding that his transformation needed to be genuine rather than performative. "We've had some conversations," I admitted. "Supervised meetings with counselors present, discussions about what went wrong and why. He's different, more honest, more self-aware. He's working to become someone worthy of trust again." But the question of reconciliation was complicated by factors that went beyond Devin's personal growth. The investigation I'd conducted had revealed the depth of his betrayal, but it had also clarified something equally important. The person I'd become during our marriage wasn't someone I wanted to be again. The woman who hid her success to make others comfortable. The woman who subsidized other people's lives while minimizing her own achievements. She's gone. I've built something extraordinary here, and I won't diminish it for anyone ever again. I gestured around the conference room, with its view of the city and its evidence of real accomplishment. Whatever relationships I have going forward need to enhance this life, not require me to hide from it. Natasha nodded thoughtfully. "That makes sense. You shouldn't have to make yourself smaller to make other people comfortable." As our meeting concluded, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought us all to this point. 6 months ago, I was living a carefully constructed lie, hiding my success and subsidizing the lives of people who not only failed to appreciate my generosity, but actively resented it. Today, I was operating at full capacity, surrounded by colleagues who respected my achievements and building relationships based on mutual value rather than hidden dependency. The old Cassandra would have felt guilty about the consequences Devin and Natasha had faced. The new Cassandra understood that consequences were educational, and that the most loving thing I could do for people who had been destroying themselves through entitlement and deception was to force them to confront reality. Both Devin and Natasha were building authentic lives now. Smaller lives than they had when I was subsidizing their existence, but genuine lives based on their own efforts and abilities. Whether those lives would eventually intersect with mine in meaningful ways remains to be seen. But for the first time in years, I was optimizing for my own happiness rather than managing other people's emotions. And the freedom that came with that choice was worth more than any relationship built on deception could have ever been. The woman who had once hid her empire to preserve a marriage was gone. In her place stood someone who understood that the right relationships would celebrate her success, not require her to diminish it.